Yep. Right, just be warned, I'm suffering from COVID and I've got that brain fog that comes with it. And I don't make a lot of sense at the best of times, but I might make even less sense than usual. You've been warned. First of all, just a couple of corrections to last Wednesday's video, the detailed overview or walk around of the Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650. This is why first impression reviews are a bit dodgy, and exactly why I don't do them. I've described a couple of parts incorrectly. First of all, the mirrors. The mirror dishes themselves are made from chrome-plated metal and not plastic, as I stated, so they are an all-metal mirror. And the oil cooler guard, I described it as being die-cast aluminium. I've got no idea where that idea came from. It is pressed metal. I'm not sure if it's aluminium or steel, but anyway, I got that bit wrong. This is exactly why I like to have the bike for, at the very least a week, because first impressions are so deceiving. It doesn't matter what your intentions are or how careful you are, you cannot fully absorb and appreciate a motorcycle in a day. So to that end, I've been using this bike for a week. Now, I've not used it every single day because the weather's been crap. I have used it ad hoc for, running errands, going to the shops, visiting people, that kind of thing. And I've had 2 full days filming with the bike. Enough time, I think, to get a pretty accurate idea of what the bike is all about. Now, I do still have this motorcycle. Royal Enfield haven't recalled it yet, so we might just have time for me to do a question and answer session on Friday. And if there are specific things that you want to know about this bike, specific questions, ask me in the comment section down below and I'll do my best to accommodate you. What I can't do is test pillion comfort, because as I've said in the past, I'm not sure of the insurance situation on a press bike and I don't want to risk it. So, first things first, in the great tradition of YouTube reviews, normally we would do an overview of the technical specifications of this motorcycle. I don't normally do that because it's boring and you can get that information from a brochure. And it doesn't really tell you an awful lot about the bike. But since the review of the Hunter last year, I've had 1 or 2 anoraks spitting the dummies out over it. So here we go. The Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650 has a wheel. Well, not just one wheel, but 2 wheels. One at the front and one at the back. In the middle, we have a 650cc engine bit that makes it go. It's got handlebars on either side so that you can steer it, a fuel tank for putting fuel in, and a seat thing so that you can sit on it and ride it. Now, if that's not technical enough for you, I'll leave a link to Royal Enfield's website where they've got all the technical specifications in the video description down below, and you can go there and knock yourself out. I think it's quite clear from Royal Enfield's pricing structure that the Super Meteor 650 is now their flagship model. Top of the range touring version being the most expensive motorcycle in their lineup. As I'm constantly reminded in the comments section, Royal Enfields are fabled to be made like a gun, which I suppose means that the Super Meteor 650 is their top gun. It's powered by the same 650cc twin-cylinder engine that we see used on the Interceptor and the Continental GT, with, I'm told, slightly different mapping, although I couldn't really discern a difference. It's easy to draw conclusions that this is a Harley copy, but I think to really appreciate what the Super Meteor is, you have to look at the bullet-derived Royal Enfield models of the 1990s. The 1990s were the era of the factory custom, and Royal Enfield released 1 or 2 models based on the old Bullet. So this bike and its little sister, the Meteor 350, should be considered to be a direct descendant of those motorcycles rather than a copy of something from Japan or America. To that end, To my eyes, this bike has more of a European feel to it, with a sort of aftertaste of, motorcycles from BMW going back to the 1950s and 1960s, Motor Guzzi and Sunbeam's S7. I see this bike to be an all-rounder, a multi-purpose bike that leans more towards long-distance touring. It'll make a perfectly capable commuter, I'm sure. There's no doubt about it, this bike has been tuned, if you like, to be at its best above 40 miles an hour, and I'll explain more about that as we go along. Now, in order to try and sort of provide you with a review that gives you a comprehensive idea of how this bike performs in all walks of life, I did a considerable amount of mileage on just about every different type of road I could find. Dual carriageway commuter routes, busy inner city roads, some fast motorway work, fast fun rural A roads, and I also had a bit of a play around on some narrow country roads. Now, starting with the sort of 40 mile an hour commuter routes, this is where the bike really starts to shine. The upside down shower front forks, well, they just behave perfectly no matter what speed you're travelling at and what road you're on. At times it's almost like a magic carpet rad with just enough feedback to keep the rider informed of what's going on up at the front. The rear suspension, as I predicted on my initial overview, is pretty stiff. It's only at speeds of 40 miles an hour and above that it starts to react properly to the road conditions. At 40 miles an hour and above, it gives a firm but smooth and comfortable ride at the back end. It is adjustable for preload, and throughout this test I had it set on minimum preload. There is no adjustment for damping and rebound damping, however. The rebound damping seems to have been set up quite fast. The rear shocks seem to have been set up more in a performance configuration. Basically, the faster you go, the better it feels. The Seat Zoom Cruise tyres, silly name, lovely tyre, give good grip, they're very predictable, even in some of the damp verging on icy conditions that I encountered. They don't seem to be susceptible to tracking or tramlining when you go over imperfections or white lines, but that could change as the tyre squares off, because they are quite a wide profile tyre. This heavyweight motorcycle feels very stable and secure in a straight line. It handles long sweeping bends, roundabouts, that kind of thing. It all feels very nice and sorted. Confidence inspiring. Now, what did surprise me was the B-brake brakes. As far as I know, they are the same ones used on the Interceptor and the Continental GT, but they feel better, especially the back brake. I've noticed over the last decade or so that the back brake has been dumbed down substantially on the rear of most bikes. This is because of the advent of ABS. There's less weight on the rear wheel, especially when you're stopping. And the last thing that any manufacturers want is a rear brake that's constantly activating the ABS because it's losing traction. To that end, they usually tend to be quite weak, which usually results in the rider relying more on the front brake. Now, I did think about this phenomenon on the Super Meteor quite a lot. I couldn't work out whether it's the angle of attack that your foot has at the rear brake, whether that somehow amplifies the power of the rear brake, or whether Royal Enfield have beefed this rear brake up slightly because this is a heavy bike and the rider's weight is more towards the rear than on a conventional roadster. In the end, I came to the conclusion that it was the large rear disc coupled with the additional leverage your foot gets on the rear brake pedal with that foot forward riding position. Either way, it was very welcome. It was refreshing, to be honest, to be able to use the brakes in a more balanced manner rather than relying on the front brake. That's how you're supposed to operate brakes on a bike. It enhances braking stability giving a safer braking response, something I've not experienced on a bike for well over a decade now. The riding position in general is pretty much a standard sit-up and beg, the only difference being that your feet are stretched slightly out in front of you. Now, I found this a bit strange initially. There were a few times sort of setting off from traffic lights, etc., where I lifted my feet up to put them on the foot pegs and there were no foot pegs there because they were about 8 inches further forward than I'm used to them being. This only happened for the first few miles. I soon got used to it and found the riding position actually very comfortable. High speed or low speed, the weight of the rider is very much on your buttocks. It's a natural riding position. You don't find yourself tensing your stomach up to try and hold yourself upright. It all just feels very natural. But this bike's Achilles heel when it comes to comfort is low speed commuting, below 40 miles an hour. And it's mainly down to that rear suspension, although I did hit a couple of glitches with the gearbox. Now, for the most part, the gearbox behaved impeccably. It's a typical Royal Enfield gearbox, one of the best in the business. But because of the foot forward position, it has an extremely long gear linkage from the gear changer to the gearbox itself. I thought when I first saw it this could be problematic, but actually it was far better than I thought. Where you do hit a problem is if you have to crash down through the box quickly for a sudden stop and you found that you're in second or third gear when you actually come to a halt. Now, something strange happened on this section of the ride. For some reason, the pull tab on my helmet strap caught the collar of my jacket and unfastened my helmet, so I had to pull in quickly to refasten it. I think I actually stopped in second gear, and the issue that I had was that at a standstill, I just couldn't get the gear linkage to work. This happened twice altogether in the week that I had it. I found that the way around it was to let the clutch out very slightly in between each attempt to change down, which solved it. Not a deal breaker. I've had other bikes over the years that have exhibited similar behaviour. It's just something to be aware of. And the clutch, by the way, is very light. Now, to test out the suspension at low speed, I took the bike to Hollywood. That's like Hollywood, except it's smaller, colder, and a lot cheaper. A lot of big movie makers come here to Hull's old town to use our old Victorian cobbled streets in scenes meant to depict Victorian London. In fact, you might recognise these streets from the opening scene of Enola Holmes 2, which I think was released late last year. Now, to be fair to the Super Meteor, these granite stone sets that make up the sort of little road network in this area are particularly nasty. I've not come across suspension on any bike that really copes with it well. Now, the Showa upside down front forks, just like every other aspect of this test, performed flawlessly. It's almost like a magic carpet ride everywhere you go. The same couldn't be said of the rear suspension. You feel every imperfection and every bump. And as the actress said to the bishop, the rider's backside takes an absolute pounding. Granted, this is not the type of environment that the Super Meteor 650 is intended to be used on, but inevitably a lot of riders will have to ride on poor road surfaces at low speeds for the daily commute, or even if you're doing a bit of touring, you encounter roads like that. This section of road is rather extreme, but you still get one or two nasty shocks on smoother, slow roads where there's the occasional pothole or bad road repair. Not a deal breaker unless you're riding in that kind of environment all the time. Now, it has to be said, the lock-to-lock on the steering isn't huge. This bike has the turning circle of the Emoco Cadiz. This isn't a problem in normal turn-by-turn riding conditions, and you can actually carry out a reasonable U-turn on a reasonably wide piece of carriageway. But on a single lane carriageway, forget it unless you've got a firm, dry, reasonably wide grass veg. Otherwise, a 2 or 3.10 is the order of the day. This bike was not designed for slalom work. Low speed manoeuvrability on this bike is best described as ponderous, but where it really shines is when you get out on the open road. Starting with motorways, it's an absolute delight. I'm going to estimate that the top speed of this bike is somewhere around about 100 miles an hour. It reaches 70 miles an hour with a judicial flick of the wrist, and you can hold it there all day, with plenty of power in reserve. And rider comfort isn't too shabby. Now, this 650 Twin is renowned for its smooth performance. You get what I would describe as being a very slight resonance from the engine, not vibration, resonance, at around about 60 miles an hour, but that's gone by the time you hit 70. The laid back, if you like, riding position is very comfortable. You don't feel as though you're having to fight the wind. In fact, that was another big surprise with this bike. The aerodynamics are such that you have nothing but clean air around your helmet. You don't really feel much pressure. But instead of the wind pressure hitting you square on the chest and pushing you back, it seems to sort of come from your waist and move upwards, which gives you a slightly sort of lifting sensation, rather than pushing you backwards, which means you can hold 70 miles on the motorway long periods of time without any fatigue setting in at all. The well padded seat is comfortable, and at this point the rear suspension is behaving impeccably. This is where the damping and rebound damping are designed to be working at the best, and it is very obvious at this speed when you're riding the bike. The Super Meteor and its incumbent weight mean that it is very stable at speed. It's not affected too severely by side winds, which are often an issue with these fast roads that run along the Humber. The bike feels unstoppable, and you sort of get that sense of being king of the road. Everything about it just feels right at high speed. I found that I was comfortable on this bike for about 2 hours, and then just a little bit of numbness started to creep in on my inner thighs. Not an urgent I've got to get off this bike and stretch my legs feeling, but you did start to notice it. The Super Meteor's real territory, however, is on fast A and B roads. This is where it really shines. The supreme heavyweight stability and that king of the road feeling that you get from this bike just make it an absolute pleasure on these roads. Plenty of additional power for sensible overtaking if you need to, but these are the type of roads that you feel as though this bike was intended for. It eats fast sweeping bends for breakfast. The tyres are sure-footed, and the taut rear suspension dials out any possibility of wallowing. And as I said, I had the rear preload set up on minimum on this bike, so it's going to be just as good with the pillion. You might just have to whack the preload up a couple of notches. This bike weighs just under a quarter of a tonne with 47-48 brake horsepower on tap. One of the biggest comments that I get about the 650 Twin from Royal Enfield is that the engine is underpowered. Just to put this into perspective, this particular bike has a power to weight ratio of about 200 brake horsepower per tonne. Now, my car, a Mini Clubman, which is based on a BMW 3 Series, I think, weighs just over a tonne, has round about 132 brake horsepower, and it's considered to be a sporty car, with a power to weight ratio of about 120 brake horsepower per tonne. Which means that in reality, this bike is getting on for being twice as powerful. That's enough for anybody, really. Now, one thing that does puzzle me with this bike, similar sort of thing that puzzled me with the 350 Meteor really, is why so many gears. This has a 6-speed gearbox, and in my opinion for this sort of bike, that's about 2 gears too many. I may be wrong, but I don't think this type of sort of cruiser or factory custom is intended to be a bike where you're constantly steering the gearbox. Now, when you get out on the open road like this, you can put it in 6th gear and you can just leave it there. It can handle pretty much anything you can throw at it, including hills. But in a lot of other circumstances where you're in perhaps slow moving traffic, you're constantly changing gear. In fact, to get round it, I did find myself short shifting once or twice just to avoid constantly pulling the clutch in and changing gear. Not sure whether Royal Enfield have done this for emissions reasons or whether it's just sort of bowing down to consumer expectations. But a well-spaced, well-sorted 4-speed gearbox, I think, personally, would have been perfect for this bike. That's just my opinion. Now, on narrower B roads, you do become a little bit more conscious of the weight and the limited manoeuvrability. Now, I think this is more psychological than practical. You just become more aware of its limitations than actually experiencing them, if that makes any sense to you. I found on these sort of roads I became a bit more focused, which isn't a bad thing, and I found I had a tendency of keeping the speed down. I think what it was for me is that, you know, this is the kind of bike where you can change your line quickly if something presents itself in front of you, like gravel or a patch of ice. You know, this bike isn't going to react in the same way that, you know, a roadster or a more sporty orientated bike will. There's less margin for error on these type of roads, and I think probably the icy conditions were sort of a major contributing factor to my behaviour. The bike never misbehaved once. You know, you choose a line, it sticks to it and it carries you through without any drama. I think to some extent it was probably unfamiliarity with the bike. You know, I felt that if I had to change a line at short notice, it might not accommodate me in the way I'm used to. Deliberate, smooth and steady is the order of the day with the Meteor on these sort of more restrictive roads. Don't get me wrong, it can do it. I just think, you know, it's probably the sort of bike where you shouldn't push that sort of envelope. But at the end of the day, it's a cruiser. It's not intended to be a backroad scratcher. Now, I have pointed out what I consider to be the limitations of this motorcycle in this video. I hope that hasn't come across as being too negative, because at the end of the day, this is an outstanding motorcycle, especially for the money. I think I made it quite clear right from the announcement of this bike, which must be about 6 months ago now, that I'm not a cruiser guy. And in a lot of ways, I'm glad that I was late to the game reviewing it, because I wasn't looking forward to reviewing it. I expected to hate the Super Meteor, but it's grown on me. And I'll tell you why. You know, for as long as I can remember, there's one bike that I've always coveted, the Sunbeam S7. I've only ever seen one in the flesh once, and I've certainly never ridden one. It would probably be a huge disappointment if I did. Sunbeam S7 is a huge, large capacity tourer from the late 1950s, early 1960s. It just has that look about it that's always captivated me. And I think part of my attraction to the Mule, my classic 500, is that, you know, the look quite similar. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that the Super Meteor 650 has more of a continental look to it than an American look, and I hold on to that opinion. I think part of it is the colour scheme. But I started to realise over a week of riding this bike that it handles and performs, and it gives you that feeling that I've always imagined that I would get from a Sunbeam S7. This is the perfect bike for commuting on, as long as you're not going sort of long distances on slow, bumpy roads. It's a bike perfectly suited to weekend days out, but this is also going to be a very accomplished tourer with the right luggage. It's a gorgeous bike that did get a lot of attention while I've had it out from passers-by. And I'm not saying that I'm going to buy one, but I did start to feel a bit covetous of it as time went by, and I'm glad that Royal Enfield haven't as yet called the bike back. And I will say, if you're in the market for a do-it-all motorcycle with an emphasis on doing a bit of touring, the Super Meteor has to be a contender. You could do a lot worse. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, and if you do subscribe, hit the notification bell and ensure that your channel notifications are enabled. That way YouTube will let you know whenever I upload a new video. I will of course be back on Friday with that question and answers session if you're game for it. So until then, ride safely and I'll see you soon.